fall, so it's really a pleasure to get to come back and get to worship. It's always a treat. But I do need a little interaction this morning. I know it's 10:30. I know for some people this is still an ungodly hour, sadly. I know that some people haven't had their coffee, but I just need a little interaction. All you got to do is answer a question. And you can just shout out the answer. But what is your favorite holiday / festival? What's your favorite holiday / festival?
Thanksgiving.
Birthday, okay. Easter, what's another one?
Thanksgiving.
Christmas, Thanksgiving, what? Groundhog Day. Did he not see a shadow, or did he see a shadow?
He did not.
So that means we get an early spring? Alrighty. Okay, so birthday, Christmas, Thanksgiving, Groundhog Day too. Okay, here's another question. And this is more of a fill in the blank, so you just call it out again. So let's pick one we use, Christmas. During Christmas, we celebrate
The birth of Jesus.
the birth of Jesus. What else do we celebrate on Christmas? Santa Claus, right? During Thanksgiving, we celebrate eating turkey, family. During Easter, we celebrate eating again. Somebody likes to eat, I guess. We celebrate the resurrection of Christ. But the reason we celebrate these holidays is because they evoke certain emotions in us. They evoke emotions of happiness and of joy and of love and nostalgia and many, many more. So this morning, I want to tell you an origin story. It's a story about the start of a holiday. It's a holiday that evokes great joy because it's a holiday celebrating salvation. It's a holiday celebrating the people going from death to life. And none of us celebrate it, at least I assume. But it's called the Festival of Purim. And its origin story, as we know, is in the book of Esther. So it's somewhere around 470 BC, and there's a pretty powerful guy named Ahasuerus. You may know him as he's more popularly known as King Xerxes. And King Xerxes is a very, very, very powerful guy. His kingdom stretches all the way from India to the borders of Egypt. And there's nobody like King Xerxes. Xerxes has no rival. Nobody can compare to him, and he knows that. I mean, he knows that he's all that in a bag of chips, so he decides that he wants to celebrate this. He wants to celebrate his wealth, and he wants to celebrate his success as a king, so he decides he's going to throw 2 banquets. Well, for the first banquet, he invites all of his high-ranking officials to his kingdom. And he invites them to come and to stand, and as chapter 1, verse 4 says, so they could see the splendor and pomp of his majesty for many days. So, in fact, Xerxes was so rich. He was so successful as a king, it took them 180 days in all just to show off his kingdom. He wanted people to see how wealthy he was, how successful he was. He wanted people to rally behind him as king. We all know people like this, people who just have everything and are very entitled. I mean, this is a guy who could have whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted. But this wasn't satisfactory for King Xerxes. Esther chapter 1, verse 5. When these days were completed, so when the first festival was over, the king gave for all the people present in the citadel of Susa, both great and small, a banquet lasting for 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. So he threw a second banquet with the same purpose the first one. To show off his wealth, to show off how successful he was, for people to rally behind him as king. And I can only imagine what this palace looked like, right? I mean, just beautiful marble pillars that stretch from the floor to the tall ceilings, colored stones that line the floor, white curtains that hung in front of the window as the light shimmered through. But this is what Xerxes wanted people to see. A mighty, a powerful, a rich and luxurious king. Well, toward the end of the second banquet, so we're at day 7, Xerxes has had a lot to drink by now. He had been drinking all for the 7 days. And so he decides he wants to show off his wife, Queen Vashti. So Xerxes, he tells his officials, he says, go and bring me Queen Vashti wearing the royal crown. So not only has he shown off his amazing riches and his palace and his success as a king, but now he wants to show off his queen. But for some reason, Vashti says no. She refuses to appear before King Xerxes. And up until this point, nobody has ever said no to King Xerxes. And so he was absolutely infuriated. It also didn't help that he was incredibly drunk. So what he does is he gathers together his officials. And he says, what are we going to do since the queen disobeyed me? Well, they decided they would kick the queen out of the palace. So goodbye, Queen Vashti. But also, out of fear that other women would rebel like Queen Vashti did, they decided to send out a decree to the entire kingdom stating that all women should honor their husbands and that the man should be the master of his home. This obviously hurt King Xerxes. It embarrassed him. It made him feel lesser of a man. He's a pretty shallow guy. But he does this anyways. He sends out this decree to preserve his power and his prestige as king. But now that everything has settled down at the palace, Xerxes looks around and he realizes he has no queen. And so he's pretty bummed out about it. And so his officials figure out that they got to cheer him up somehow. And so what they decided to do is they were just going to bring a plethora of virgin women to King Xerxes to cheer him up. And one of these women that will be brought to King Xerxes, her name is Esther. Now Esther has been brought up by her cousin Mordecai. And Mordecai serves on the king's cabinet. This is basically like the State Department for the kingdom of Persia. But he's also a Jew from the tribe of Benjamin. Which this also means that Esther is a Jew. So when all the women are being gathered together to go to the king's palace, Mordecai tells Esther, listen, don't say anything about your Jewish heritage. The Jews have been in exile for over 100 years now. So at this point, they're not the most famous people in the crowd. So he tells her to keep it down and don't tell anybody. And so off Esther goes to the king's palace. Well, right when she gets there, she is the talk of the town. I mean, her beauty just captivates the king's officials. And so right away, she is number one in line. She gets the best cosmetic treatments, the best makeovers, the best food. But, whether you count this good or bad, she's also the first one to have to spend the night with Xerxes. Meaning she's the first one that's going to have to sleep with him. But this is the reality that these women live in. They were viewed as property. So the king got to do whatever he pleased, whenever he wanted, with any of these women. And so that's exactly what happened. Well, after that night, King Xerxes fell in love with Esther. And he said, this is the woman who I want queen. So Esther became queen. And so following the inauguration of Esther as queen, we're introduced to a new character to the story. And his name is Haman. And Haman had just been promoted to number 2 in all of Persia. He's the king's right-hand man, so Haman is feeling pretty good about himself. But a part of the number 2's job is he is to appear before the king's cabinet. This is the place where Mordecai serves on. So when Haman appears before the king's when Haman appears before the king's cabinet, everybody bows down to Haman. All glory and praise be to Haman. He's the number 2. He's the best. Except for Mordecai. Mordecai just kind of stands there with his arms crossed and looks at Haman. Why? I mean, maybe it has something to do with Mordecai's Jewish heritage. But anyways, what this is to mean is that this infuriates Haman. So Haman decides that instead of just getting back at Mordecai, instead of just hurting Mordecai, he decides that he's going to wipe out all of Mordecai's people. Meaning Haman is going to annihilate the entire Jewish race. It seems a little intense, right? Like it seems like, why would you do that? Well, Haman goes to the king. And he uses some wordplay. We know how people do this, right? They use some vagueness when they speak, a little wordplay. They're a little manipulative. And he ends up getting King Xerxes to sign off on this declaration of genocide. And so a copy was sent out to the entire kingdom on the 13th day of the 12th month, stating that the Jewish people would be killed. The 13th day of the 12th month. This is the day before the start of Passover. So as the Jews are getting ready to celebrate their freedom from the Egyptian empire, they get a decree that says they're going to be murdered by the Persian empire. So it seems they can't catch a break. Oh, well, when this decree got out and it hit the Jewish communities, there was great mourning. I mean, Mordecai found out about this, and he was just distraught to his core. I mean, he broke down wailing. He was walking across town screaming and crying. And eventually, Queen Esther got word of this. And so she summoned one of her servants and said, take this change of clothes to Mordecai. Well, the servant goes and tries to give Mordecai the change of clothes, but he refuses. And he says, instead, give Queen Esther this message. Go and plead before the king for the lives of your people. And the message gets back to Queen Esther. She's thinking, why would Mordecai have me do something like this? She knows that if anybody goes before the king unannounced, they're liable to be killed. But what Mordecai is thinking is that if she doesn't stop this declaration of genocide and all the Jewish people are killed, she's eventually going to get found out as a Jew. And she'll be killed off with the rest of them. So Esther decides that this is exactly what she has to do. She has to go before the king and plead for the life of her people. So she sends Mordecai off. Well, Esther is getting ready to appear before the king unannounced. But Esther knows that Xerxes thinks that she is just drop-dead gorgeous. So she uses that to her advantage. She puts on her most beautiful robe. She has the best cosmetic work done, all in hopes of not getting killed. She takes the risk of going before the king. And the king sees her and is just captivated with her beauty. So he invites her in to his presence. But King Xerxes gets a little bit of a sense of urgency from Esther, because she obviously just risked her life to see him. So he says, what is it, Esther? What can I do for you? Anything you want. And Esther has this amazing opportunity to beg for the life of her people. But instead, we see in chapter 5, verse 4, if it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to a banquet that I have prepared for the king. Okay. So King Xerxes and Haman get up and they go to the banquet, and Xerxes asks Esther, what is it that you really wanted? Because he knows Esther would not have risked her life just to ask for a get-together. So once again, Esther has this amazing opportunity to beg for the life of her people, but instead she says, will you and Haman come to another banquet tomorrow? And we're sitting here reading the story, just going, what in the world are you doing? The Jewish people are at stake to die, and all you're concerned about are banquets. But maybe Esther is smarter than we think she is. Up to this point, Esther has thrown a banquet for the king and the second in the kingdom. He's put food in their belly. She's put food in their belly. She's put wine in their belly. They're feeling pretty good. They're feeling pretty grateful for Queen Esther. And then she promised a second banquet? I mean, come on, at this point, who could ever deny a request from the most hospitable and the sweetest Queen Esther? Well, after the banquet, everybody decides to go their separate ways. And then Haman is going on home, and he passes the king's gate. And there's Mordecai once again just standing there, not bowing. It ticks Haman off once again, but he keeps to himself, and he gets on home. Well, when he gets home, he's telling his family and his friends all about his day. He's gotten to eat with royalty. He's number 2 in the kingdom. His life is great. Except there's this one guy, Mordecai the Jew, and he just will not bow to me. So his wife, Zeresh, speaks up. And she said, why don't you just go in the back and build these giant gallows, these giant stakes, 75 feet tall, and impale Mordecai on them. Just kill him. Get rid of him. And Haman's like, man, that's a great idea. And that's exactly what happened. He builds these gallows in preparation to kill Mordecai. So things are still not looking good at all. Then we get to Esther chapter 6, verse 1. Well, on that night, the king could not sleep, and he gave orders to bring the book of records. This is the recordings of everything that he has done as king. And they were read to the king. So as King Xerxes is being serenaded to sleep by the sound of the miraculous details of his superb kingship, he runs across an event that he completely forgot about. Right after Esther was inaugurated as queen, Mordecai was standing at the king's gate, and he overheard a plan to assassinate Xerxes. So obviously this not only puts the king in danger, but it also puts the queen in danger. So Mordecai runs to tell Esther all about it. Well, Esther took that message to the king, and the king started an investigation and found those 2 men guilty and killed them. Mordecai saved the king's life, and King Xerxes just looked right over it. Well, King Xerxes sat up in his bed, and he said, well, what's been done to honor Mordecai for saving my life? And the king's servant looked at him and said, well, nothing. Well, something has to be done. But right at this time, Haman is rushing into the palace to tell King Xerxes all about his plan to kill Mordecai. And right then, King Xerxes asked for the consultation of one of his advisors. So Haman is walking in, and he's strutting his stuff. He's feeling good. And right before he can even get a sentence out of his mouth, King Xerxes says, what shall be done for the man whom the king wishes to honor? Haman's kind of taken back. He kind of forgets his plan to kill Mordecai because he thinks the king is talking about him. I mean, who else would the king want to honor? I'm second in the nation, right? And so Haman says to the king, for the man whom the king wishes to honor, let royal robes be brought, which the king has worn, and a horse that the king has ridden. And with a royal crown on its head, let the robes and the horse be handed over to the king's most noble officials, and let him robe the man whom the king wishes to honor, and let him conduct the man on horseback through the open square of the city, proclaiming before him, thus shall it be done for the man whom the king wishes to honor. Haman suggests the whole 9 yards here. Everything for the best. Well, King Xerxes says, man, I love the idea. So here's exactly what I want you to do. I want you to go do that for Mordecai the Jew who's standing at the gates. And Haman is just jaw-dropped astonished. I mean, he cannot believe that Mordecai is the man whom the king wants to honor. Well, Haman does as the king wishes. And he goes and he gets Mordecai, and he puts the robes on him, and he puts him on a horse, and he leads him around town proclaiming, "Thus shall be done for the man whom the king wishes to honor." So instead of killing Mordecai, he had to celebrate Mordecai's life. Well, after this, Haman was very distraught. So he went home crying to his wife, "I can't believe the day I just had. My plans are foiled." And Zeresh, his wife, looks at him and said, "If Mordecai, before whom your downfall has begun, is of the Jewish people, you will not prevail against him, but surely fall before him." Why is Mordecai's heritage as a Jew why does it have anything to do with Haman's plan to kill him and the rest of the Jewish people? Well, in the midst of Haman's mourning, two of the king's officials rush to his house and take him away to the king's palace for the banquet that Esther promised to give to them. Esther chapter 7, verse 1. So the king and Haman went in to feast with Queen Esther. But King Xerxes is still not convinced that Queen Esther risked her life just for a banquet. So he comes out and he says, "Queen Esther, what do you want? Anything in the world, and you got it, baby." And this is it. The Queen Esther finally looks at him and says, "If I have won your favor, O king, if it pleases the king, let my life be given to me. That is my petition. And the life of my people, that is my request." She tells King Xerxes that someone has plotted to kill her and all of her people. And King Xerxes was absolutely astonished. He said, Who would dare to kill my queen?" And Esther looked back to Haman, and she looked at the king, and she looked back to Haman, and she looked at the king, and she said, "A foe, an enemy, that wicked Haman." A boy was Haman scared now. He had no idea that Esther was Jewish. Remember when Esther became queen, Mordecai told Esther to keep it on the down low. Well, Haman is freaking out. King Xerxes is incredibly mad. You know, we all get so infuriated, sometimes we just got to leave the room. Well, that's exactly what King Xerxes does. He just walks out into his garden to try to cool down. Well, while that was going on, Haman jumped up on the couch next to Esther and was just begging for his life. "I'm sorry, Queen Esther, I didn't know you were Jewish. Please save my life." Wrong move. Xerxes comes back into the room, and he doesn't know what he sees. All he sees is Haman all up on his queen. And Xerxes proclaims, "Will he even assault the queen in my presence, in my own house?" Well, Xerxes thought that Haman was trying to rape Queen Esther. And that was the end of Haman. His face was covered, and he was destined to die. And this part I can only picture. One of the king's officials, Harbona, he said, "Hey, King Xerxes, you know, Haman built, in his backyard, he built some gallows to kill Mordecai on. Why don't you just take Haman and go and kill him on those?" King Xerxes was like, "All right, let's do it." And that was it. Haman died. And we think the story would be over, but it's not. Now the clock is ticking. Because even though Haman is dead, the decree to kill the Jews is still out there. And so Esther, using the king's love for her as her advantage, she got down on her knees and she was begging the king. She said, "Please save me from my pain. Don't let my people be killed." King Xerxes thought he had fixed everything. He said, "I killed Haman. What else is there more for me to do?" And so he gave Esther permission to do whatever she needed to save the Jewish people. And so Mordecai writes a new decree stating that the Jews were allowed to assemble and defend themselves and kill anyone who tried to attack them. And he signed it with the king's signet ring, making it official. And this decree was sent out to every province and published to all people in every language. And boy, when the Jews found out about this, they were excited. They were jumping around in the streets, hooping and hollering, because their lives had been miraculously saved. But even though there was lots of celebration, the day still had to come. The day where the decree that the Jews could be killed and that the Jews could defend themselves, this was the day. Esther chapter 9, verse 16. Now the other Jews who were in the king's provinces also gathered to defend their lives and gained relief from their enemies, and killed 75,000 of those who hated them, but they laid no hand on the plunder. This was on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th day they rested and made that a day of feasting and gladness. But the Jews who were in Susa gathered on the 13th day and on the 14th day, and then they rested on the 15th day, making that a day of feasting and gladness. All this to say is that the Jewish people won. They were able to defend themselves thanks to Mordecai's decree. It's literally translated in verse 9 as a miraculous reversal occurred. The Jews won. They defended themselves. And so they created the Festival of Purim to commemorate this amazing moment in time, which, by the way, will be celebrated in the month of March on the 8th and the 9th in many Jewish communities. And then get this, King Xerxes had a job opening. He needed a new number 2. So guess who got it? Mordecai. Mordecai was now number 2. And that's how the story ends. The Jewish people are saved. Esther and Mordecai are royalty. And that's it. But there's got to be more to the story than what's just on the surface level. You know, I think about all of these crazy coincidences that happened during the story. All of these plot twists. Do we think it's a coincidence that Esther became queen? I'm reminded of Mordecai's words. Who knows? Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for such a time as this to save your people. Is it a coincidence that the very night that Haman plotted to kill Mordecai, King Xerxes had insomnia and couldn't sleep? And he had the records of his reign read to him and was reminded that he had to honor Mordecai for saving his life. And so instead of Haman dragging Mordecai onto the gallows and killing him, he had to parade him around town, celebrating him. I'm reminded of Haman's wife Zeresh's words. If Mordecai, before whom your downfall has begun, is of the Jewish people, then you will not prevail against him, but surely you will fall before him. Is it a coincidence that Esther won the king's favor and was able to appear before him and throw him banquets and eventually fight for the lives of her people? Is it a coincidence that King Xerxes allowed Mordecai to write a decree telling the Jewish people that they could defend themselves? Are these coincidences? Is it a coincidence that the reversal occurred and the Jewish people were saved? Maybe these are coincidences. But also, maybe it wasn't. And so if it wasn't, we're left wondering, well, who is the orchestrator of the miraculous reversal that occurred? All glory and praise to the God who works for the good of those whom he loves, even when we cannot see it. Father, we are grateful for that small truth.